bit of background to my awakening. I had a very, very abusive childhood. Psychologically, more so than physically. Throughout my childhood and teenage years and my 20s and early 30s, and throughout my life, periodically, I have suffered. Awakening is now an end to that suffering, and to be able to confess after so many years of suffering that I am now awake is very liberating. Not just for myself, but for anyone and everyone who I might have depended upon or emotionally, if you like, blackmailed to be responsible for me. Anyway, throughout my childhood, I had continuous asthmatic attacks, continuous headaches, continually head banging at night, bang, 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 against the bed as a child and throughout my teenage years, and even as an adult, occasionally wake up having, banging my head. So I had this constant torment going in my head, constant chit-chat going on. I was heavily medicated, and I attempted suicide. I was teased greatly, ridiculed greatly, called many names, punished at school physically. I was put down by my mother many times. I won't go into any detail, but I was suffering. But at the same time, happiness was bleeding through me. And I was always turning to God, or I was Godward. I would pray at night. Please, Lord, make me a good boy. Please, Lord, it's my fault that my parents were always arguing. Please make me a better boy. Jesus, I want to be more like you. I don't want to be a follower. I want to be more like you. Where does that come from? A little child saying that. And in my 20s, God, I want you, only you, to hold me up. I don't want any scaffolding holding me up. I want only you to hold me up. Where does that come from? So inherently, I felt this divine pull. It was this pull towards the divine, out of my suffering, away from my suffering. I had anxiety attacks daily. For years and years, I would sweat profusely, sticking to chairs and sticking to the backs of the pew at church. I was so self-conscious. I was riddled with inferiority complexes, riddled. There was never any Peter that I could identify with. So my background was of extreme suffering, extreme. I sought help. I took the responsibility upon myself to find answers, counsellors and self-help groups and psychiatrists, even had ECT when I was 40 years ago, more. I played the cello and I played the piano. It was quite an emotional outlet for me. I played with great feeling. I became extremely good at both instruments. I was the principal cellist in many orchestras. I played a heck of a lot of pit work with all operas and musicals. I played continuo cello on stage, you know, Messiah and other works of that ilk. But I didn't have any real training. Not any real training, not any nitty-gritty training. It was intuitive. I was a great teacher. I've produced very good musicians. I was full-time married to music. I couldn't go anywhere without feeling music pulling me. But in the midst of all that suffering and that inner driven anxiety to do well, to overcome my limitations, to become better, there was this desire to get to know God more, to understand God. There was such a lot of dichotomy in my life, so many opposites and contradictions. I questioned a lot of why could I play better out of town than playing in a local band? You know, why did I feel better when I went shopping in a foreign town compared to a local town? I was one of 5 children, brought up in a very small house for 7 of us. Ridiculous. I considered myself to be the bad sheep of the family. But there were problems in our family, emotional problems, great emotional problems. I wasn't really parented as well as I would like to have been, but we are given what we are given for particular reasons. And for me, it was to become awake, to become liberated. As I said, I was seeking, I was looking for answers, but no one gave me answers. Not really. I knew myself inside out. There was a record that we played as a child. It was a Peter Rabbit record, Beatrix Potter stories. And Peter Rabbit was singing this song on the record, and my name being Peter, I identified with it. Peter Rabbit was always getting into trouble, was always being punished. And Peter Rabbit would sing, "Why do I do it? Nobody knows. There's naughtiness in everyone, but twice as much in me." I used to sing that over and over because it was played over and over. I identified with that record. Exasperated the condition of suffering. So yes, for years and years, right from a baby, 6 months old, I had asthma. And then continually throughout my life, I was head banging. Bang, 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 bang on the head. The cot would roll from one side of the room to the other, I was told. I was teased enormously by my siblings and people at school calling me names from across the street. Names I didn't even understand. Bummer, pufter. I was in a heck of torment in my head. Constant battling in my head over my sexuality. Attempted suicide because I couldn't accept it 4 or 5 times. I was always going towards Jesus. Jesus saved me. I was a Christian, I was a churchgoer, but I was never happy with the conventional religion, never. Inherently, intuitively, I knew there was something wrong with society and the way we're living and brought up and controlled, and you either get a cross or you get a tick. That's all wrong. It's all nonsense. You know, as a cellist, I would think, well, okay, this is a modern piece with modern sounds compared to a piece by Bach And I would think, well, surely these sounds that the modern composer is using were around in Bach's day. Of course they were. All the sounds, all the dissonances, all the modern day compositions could easily have been, not easily, but they were around in Bach's day. So I noticed that even with evolution, there's no such thing really. There's development, there's change, but everything exists. It exists all in one. There's only oneness. There's no division. As a child, I couldn't understand the signs, private property. This is my property, not your property. I couldn't understand the for sale signs. I couldn't understand division. When I was gardening in the front or outside the house as a child, I would weed not only our side, I would go on to the neighbours and weed right along the road. There was no limitation, there was no stop, there was no, it's an imaginary boundary. This weed is on your side, this weed is on our side of we've got this continuous curbstone. I couldn't understand it. There was a freedom about me. There was a God-given, there was an understanding intuitively, but I didn't have the language, I didn't have the vocabulary. So I had a difficult childhood growing up. I was always in trouble with the police. But there was a freedom about me. I was very emotional. I hated the thought of my mother dying. Hated it. I cried buckets over losing her, or the thought of losing her. But I was labelled ill. I was labelled a problem child. I had so many therapies. I had speech therapy. I had ECG tests. I had hospitalisation under observation. I had no end of medication. I had counselling at school. I had counselling, child guidance clinics. There was no cure for me, though. No cure. I had a surrogate family, a family that loved me, that embraced me, that saw I wasn't a problem. I was a bastard at times, bastard. The names and I called my mother, but then there was the other side of me. I mean, I was asked to do an essay on something. I did it on etiquette. I was asked to do an assembly in the sixth form. I did it on love. On the title of my assembly was, "Do we only remember our mothers on Mothering Sunday? Do we only love our mothers on Mothering Sunday?" Where was that coming from? The age of 16. What was I about? I was about love. I was reaching out to become love, to be happy, to be joy. I was reaching out. So I became a cellist, but I never felt confident. I never felt, you see, the creative people, they're vehicles for that expression. They're vessels, and they have this there's a feeling that they're not doing it. So there was I on stage playing Continuo in Messiah, and thinking, how on earth did I do that? Occasionally I had standing ovations, but I never thought I was any good. I was continually being asked to play. I had no qualifications due to my breakdowns and college interruptions with suicidal attempts. I never completed a course. I wasn't academic enough. My mind was interfering all the time. Doubt, self-doubt, riddled with it. Now, awakening from this to this, I'm using the clenched fist and the open hand analogy. To awaken with a capital A is awakening from all of that dross, all of that dilemma, all of that uncertainty. It's rising above it all. It's shining away from it all. Because all of that was what we call first birth stuff. What we begin to identify with, what society wants us to identify with, so they can pigeonhole us, set us in concrete, control us. But I had to step out of it, and I am out of it. I'm away from all that stuff. But the clenched fist activity, like right now, is creating a pain, and that's creating a redness, is at the root of all of my suffering and all of your suffering and unhappiness and dilemma and seeking. To awaken is to be relieved, mysteriously or magically or gracefully, because the clenched fist can't open itself. It's continually, that's what it's the activity of clenching. So that's why I call this channel of mine Awaken with Me. And me is real God. And I found real God when I was about in my mid-30s, getting towards 40. After reading so many books and considering all kinds of help, I came across a teacher via a friend of mine, don't mind mentioning his name, Colin Deccio. He lent me a book by Adidar Samraj. There's a picture of him there, and on the front cover, The Heart Shout. And he said to me, Peter, stop doing your suffering. You are doing suffering. No one's doing it to you. Stop doing the blaming and the finger pointing. Stop doing your doubt. Stop doing your fear. Stop doing anxiety. Stop doing your dilemma and your self-consciousness, and stop doing it. It's like this. Take your finger away and stop doing it. And he would call that activity the thumb and finger problem. Because it is a thumb and finger that has been... And this is beautiful essay, which I'll read. And this book is full of lovely essays. Here's one, The Truth About God. But there's this essay called The Dreaded Gombu. And that very first statement, or page 75, that very first statement says it all. In the first two paragraphs. Have you all heard? Because Adidar is an awakened being with capital A. He's the supreme awakened being in my estimation, if I have an estimation. He is the creme de la creme. He is, although he passed away 12 years ago, he is the greatest of all beings that has ever walked the earth. And if you're really interested in awakening, or really interested in the truth about religion, about health, about diet, about sex, about any of these subjects, and suffering and unhappiness and real happiness, you've got to read him. He's written over 80 books and so many talks, loads of them on YouTube. But here I am wanting to share with you. Have you, one of his essays, one of his talks, have you all heard about the dreaded gumbo, or the impossible 3-day thumb and finger problem? Aha, you see. Nobody tells you about these things except me. Now this is it. A myth. See, it's not a fact. It's not an actuality. It's a myth. Has been circulating for many centuries, for thousands of years, that humanity is diseased. So why are there so many doctors and surgeons and physicians? Because we all imagine that we are diseased. Psychological problems. Of course, if you've broken your leg, that's not an imagination. You've broken your leg, or if you've got a heart problem, you've got a heart problem. But the psychological, all this stuff that goes in on the head, that all beings are suffering from what I call the dreaded gumbo. All that chit-chat's going on in your head right now, no doubt. How often do you sit down and not have any chit-chat going on in your head? How often do you do a functional activity without chit-chat going on in your head? How often is your mind really quiet, really still? You can see me talking here, you can see me expressing, but my mind is extremely still. I can sit here now and there's nothing going on in my head, absolutely nothing. And I'm feeling God living in this body-mind. It's a stillness, a happiness, a joy that is the awakened state. Love, bliss. And he says that all beings are suffering what I call the dreaded gumbo, also known as sin. Sin means separation from God, by the way. Maya, ego, suffering, separated individuality, illusion, delusion, confusion, and indifference. Everyone believes that they are a separate I, separate from that I. We're all separate beings. You're supposed to accept this diagnosis, realize how diseased you are, and submit yourself to the local religious hospital, where a father or mother doctor will confirm your disease and require you to submit for the rest of your life to Bayer's regimes for your own healing and ultimate cure. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't this heart impulse to become responsible for this body-mind and to reach out to a greater understanding of this activity of sin or Maya or ego suffering. And there's been books and books and books written about this so-called imaginary disease. And there's millions, well, thousands of people right now who are known as psychiatrists and counsellors putting their stuff on these patients. Instead of saying to the people that come to them, stop doing what you ridiculous nonsense, stop it. Stop doing your suffering. The self-contraction is another word for it. I mean, yes, there are some people who have really, it's just gone too far for that to happen, but anyway, even the great Freuds and the Piagets and the, what's his other name, Freud and, I can't think of his name right now, they have their own problems. They were still doing the self-contraction. They weren't awakened beings. I mean, what they were doing, going back to this analysis, they were seeing the results of the self-contraction. Oh, he's like he is because of the conditions, because of his mother, because of his teacher, because, it's all conditional stuff. The self-contraction is at the root of all of this that people want to try and cure. They can't cure it. The only cure is to stop doing it. Stop it, and then you open up. So, you're supposed to accept this diagnosis, realize how diseased you are, and submit yourself to the local religious hospital, where a father or mother doctor will confirm your disease and require you to submit for the rest of your life to various regimes for your own healing and ultimate cure. Such is the basic proposition of traditional religion, and it begins with the diagnosis of the dreaded disease. I've come to tell you, as I stand in the midst of the priests of this horror, that not even one of you is suffering from this disease. It is an imaginary disease, a terrible disease, but altogether imaginary. No one has ever actually had this disease. Not one single being has ever had what he called the dreaded gombu. What is the truth? Well, if you look at children when they're at play, children don't have the concerns as adults do. They're not thinking about where the next pay packet's coming from and how they're going to afford the next meal or considering their electricity bill. The children are just children. And when they're allowed to be children without imposition upon them, without controlling them, they're free and happy and joyful. And that's what Adidar tells us. He says, what is the truth? You are already happy with a capital H. You live in God, that's me with a capital M. The Great One is your very being, so the Great One is actually living our body and mind. You inhere in this love blissful, forceful being of the starry God, the mystery, the person of love. That's your situation and your destiny. And this is my message to you. There is no disease. There is nothing to cure. You are not a patient and you are not parented. You are not a child. No dreadful destiny lies before you. There is nothing whatsoever to cure. And that is the liberating message that I heard. And that was the beginning of my love relationship with Adidar Samraj. And there I am contemplating an image, because what he said was, I am your true state. I am the open hand. I am that awakened condition. I am me with a capital M. And if you wish to become your true self and live as your true self, you've got to link up with me. If you wish to become, if you wish to enjoy the rays of the sun, you have to put yourself in that position where the sun can shine upon you. You've got to find that place in order to be sunburnt. So if you wish to be awakened, as an open hand, he said, turn to me, keep turning to me, and you'll find that you open up. It's true. And that's true life. And Jesus said the same, and many teachers have said the same, but how many practitioners are there? How many people really understand that it's a minute by minute, second by second activity? You've got to keep going towards God all the time in the form of your, what he calls Ishta, chosen gardener. Well, that's an introduction and a background to my awakening and why I wanted to live the rest of my life not from a destiny of suffering and unhappiness, identifying with the dross of the first birth step, but as it says in the Bible, enter a second birth. The death of this and the awakening to this just goes away. And that's happiness and joy and delight. I know counsellors, I know psychotherapists, I know people who've written books on the chakra system, and I've read a lot, well, quite a bit, I suppose, and I've dabbled in it, but nothing can take you away from doing the self-contraction, doing unhappiness under all the conditions of life, other than linking up what's called satsang, communing with the awakened being, with the sun. And then you will feel that you are a lover under all circumstances. And there's no more control, there's no more manipulating, there's no more blaming and finger pointing. You are just bloody happy. No matter what, honestly, no matter what. So all your tendencies, you might have a tendency to want everything tidy all the time. But when you awake, you tidy up, but you don't, it's not a big deal. You're not coming from anxiety. You're not coming from that, absolute, I've got that, I won't be happy unless it's all tidy. I won't be happy unless it's all tidy. Disposition. It is a change of disposition. What comes to mind? Mozart might play a scale, la da 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 da, and not finish it. And it would that annoy him? Could he leave that last note out? That happens in The Sound of Music, of course, do a dear, female dear. So, now the awakened being can play the last note or not play the last note. He's already happy, already joy, already pleased. Already. So, another little video to understand about my background and why it was necessary for me to awaken. Thank you for listening.